Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. One of the biggest criticisms levied against the clone troopers was that their training and growth period was just far too long and expensive to maintain for a large military force. Even with their DNA altered to allow them to age at twice the rate of the average human being, a clone trooper wasn't ready for deployment until at least 9 years of preparation on Camino. The Geonosian assembly lines, on the other hand, were capable of producing a B-1 battle droid every few seconds. We can talk about the quantity versus quality debate until we're blue in the face, but at one point, quantity just overwhelms quality to such an extent that it's no longer even a discussion. And that's really the situation the clone troopers in the Grand Army of the Republic faced, a never-ending line of battle droids fresh from the factories. It was almost like a video game for the clones. But there is one huge advantage with the clone troopers' 9-year development time, and it has a lot to do with what these clones are doing in those 9 years. Like the Jedi and many other warrior cultures in the galaxy, the clones were trained from birth to fight. The only problem is this training wasn't developed by the Republic's military leaders. Not that the Republic really had any military leaders during the Rusan Reformation, that is. The clone army wasn't even developed by the political class who managed the federal budget. Instead, you had a slightly paranoid Jedi Master suffering from dark force visions, using dirty money given to him by a Sith lobbying group, purchasing this gigantic army with very vague instructions other than create the most competent military force this money can buy. And the Sith arranged for Cypher Dyas to meet the Kaminoans because they liked how the Kaminoans were perfectionists. If there's one thing in a Kaminoan's life that brought joy to their icy cold dolphin hearts, it was a properly researched and developed program that exceeds all expectations. And with the clone trooper program, in a lot of ways, the Kaminoans achieved just that. They created the perfect soldier. But because the Kaminoan researchers in charge of this program had no understanding of the Republic's military needs, of their logistical capabilities, their finances, this perfect clone soldier was far from practical. It's like when some designer creates an amazing concept car that on paper does everything you want and looks absolutely amazing. But that car will realistically never make it past government regulators because the shape of the chassis doesn't fit safety regulations. Also, you'll need to find new vendors to manufacture all these new parts. Heck, some of those subcontractors you're hiring might even have to upgrade their own facilities to accommodate your crazy designs. And lastly, while that concept car might look really cool, you have to figure out realistically how many people can actually afford this thing based on your designs. And then you also have to take into account, how many of these cars do you need to sell to actually break even? The Kaminoans didn't really consider any of this. They were just focused on making the perfect soldier no matter what the cost was, which is why the Republic would be in ridiculously heavy debt in the second year of the war and was forced to take out massive loans from the IGBC with a 25% interest rate to continue funding this clone army. When you choose to create a clone army, you're essentially making your manpower out of thin air. You use clones either because you have a manpower shortage or because you like the idea of having soldiers that aren't actually a part of your voting population. This means the cost of the war, as far as the loss of life and limb, will not have as big of an impact politically. Think about the French and their extremely brutal Foreign Legion. And because you've decided to use clones to avoid that political liability, you now have to grow them. There's no way around this, really. We've talked about the advanced aging that allowed clones to mature to full age by the age of 9. This was really seen as the minimal amount of time that a human being can develop without, suffering from psychotic episodes. But still, this was a long period of time, a very painful period of time. Remember, these clones were growing at an extremely fast rate. Most of you guys have probably gone through puberty. You remember what it felt like to have all those growing pains, those nightmares from just your body changing so quickly. Well, these clones were going through all of that, but at twice the rate. And instead of giving these clones tons of free time and recreation, the Kaminoans created a very complicated and thorough schedule for each clone cadet to follow. It's kind of like those suburban parents who kind of live through their children and have every second of their child's life written down on a color-coded schedule of some kind. The clones' education was very complete. First, you had an entire military curriculum squeezed into flash learning classes. These were generally memory and theory-based courses that help a young clone orient themselves on the battlefield. These classes could cover anything from the Republic's founding to how to prepare a proper fighting position to vehicle identification. There's also plenty of physical training and drilling, not only for keeping the clones in physical shape, but also so that they can become more familiar with various weapon systems that they would be firing and piloting. What little recreation the clones received was all focused on simulated battles, where testing new strategies and thinking outside the box was heavily encouraged. The end result with the clones is that you get a soldier who lacks battlefield experience but has enough certifications and training to rival even the oldest and most experienced Special Forces operators. I mean, think about it. 9 years of training for anything is a crazy amount. Most military forces have a basic training cycle that lasts just a few months at most. And in times of emergency, you can cut the fluff from basic training courses and do it even quicker. Maybe get a soldier prepared to at least not hurt themselves within under a month. But if you want that soldier to do anything more complicated than defending a fixed position, you're gonna need more complicated training. Whether that's individual training like getting certified with different weapons, going to a special school to learn a skill like jumping out of a plane, or maybe you're taking some refresher courses with your squad before deployment, or maybe your entire company is gonna partake in an urban warfare military exercise. The battlefield is a completely unpredictable and chaotic situation, and so training is crucial, especially because a lot of times when the bullets are flying, you don't even have a second to really think. Everything goes back to instincts. And when things go really haywire, well, Uncle Sam generally needs highly specialized warriors to carry out things like dangerous raids behind enemy lines or maybe fly a dangerous strike mission. And when they're attempting these really dangerous missions, they're most likely going to be looking for their more experienced soldiers. You're not going to see a lot of fresh-faced 18-year-old recruits straight out of boot camp in these positions. And so this is kind of what makes the clone troopers so special. Every one of these guys are just heavily overtrained. You know how that Marines brag that everyone in their organization, even the support staff, are riflemen first? Well, not only is every clone trooper a rifleman, but most of them are also familiar with every weapon, vehicle, and starship in the Grand Army of the Republic, and can actually operate most of their systems. No, seriously, we take this for granted, but if you watch the Clone Wars a little closer, these clones can basically do anything. They're little nodes that can be reprogrammed in a split second. You can plug these clones into any fire team or fighter wing, depending on what the mission's needs are, rather than the individual clone's skill. I mean, sure, there are clones that do specialize in specific jobs and skills like the EOD troopers, but the amount of cross-training that these clone troopers have is unprecedented. They can do a lot. For instance, remember the Battle of Coruscant? It was heavily featured in the opening scene of Episode 3. It was a very chaotic battle right in the political and financial center of the Republic. Potentially, this battle could have been a huge blow to Palpatine's image. It would make him look like he was unable to manage the war. What we aren't told in the film is the set of circumstances leading up to the battle. You see, at the time, the Republic forces had the Separatists pinned down in the Outer Rim. Coruscant was very much out of the reach of Separatist fleets and considered in the rear, a safe place where attacks didn't happen. But the Separatists would manage to get their hands on something known as the Nexus Route, which was a very specific hidden hyperspace route. You might remember this key piece of information was featured in the Citadel arc. The Nexus Route basically allowed ships from the Outer Rim to bypass several Republic fortress worlds and blockades and emerge directly over Coruscant. It would be this route that the Confederacy would use in their last-minute desperate strike against Coruscant. Now, Coruscant's home defense fleet was completely unprepared for this assault, and they would get overwhelmed and dismantled like in the opening seconds of this battle. The Open Circle fleet was still deployed in the Outer Rim sieges, and they would start to arrive in bits and pieces much later on in the battle. In the moments when Coruscant's orbital defenses were at their weakest and about to fall apart, it was actually clone troopers of the 501st Legion who would hop into starfighters and try to fight off the Separatist fleet. That 501st, as you all know, was an infantry unit. These were grunts who just happened to have plenty of time spent on the flight simulators. You see, towards the end of the war, with pilot casualties being ridiculously high, units like the 501st were encouraged to train as pilots. And being highly confident and obedient clones, that's exactly what the 501st Legion did. Now, it should be mentioned the 501st was always a very special unit because of the leadership of Anakin Skywalker. He always got the most out of his soldiers. I mean, remember that time when Fives, Jesse, and Hardcase learned how to pilot an alien Umbaran starfighter within just hours of sitting in one and used it on a combat mission? They had no manual, no prior experience with similar technology, and they basically pulled it off somehow. Another example of the flexibility of the clones would be the 104th Battalion led by Clone Commander Wolf. Several members of the unit would learn how to fly the Clone Z-95 Headhunter. They would use these starfighters to provide the unit's LAAT gunships escorts during assaults. Now, I'm not going to say it's impossible for an enlisted infantry soldier to become a flight officer, but it's a long and lengthy process. It's hard enough for one person to do it, let alone an entire unit convert from infantry to becoming starfighter pilots. You get me? It should also be mentioned that units like the 104th Battalion also had specialized training for different environments, During Plo Koon's investigation on the moon of Obadiah, the 104th had specialized armor to deal with the severe sandstorms raging across the surface of the moon. The 501st also had similar training and equipment, but for dealing with extremely cold weather environments. And realize it's not just about being warm, it's about staying warm for long periods of time, usually outside and exposed to the environments, and understanding how the cold can affect all of your equipment and change how it functions. This is not easy. Heck, you even had clone troopers for fighting in vertical underwater environments, although it seems like those guys were at least specialized somewhat. Even for units like the clone commandos, who were technically genetically different from the rank and file clones, it wasn't that hard to bring a regular clone into a clone commando unit. When Omega Squad lost their sniper and medic Phi, a regular clone named Core stepped right into the position and performed very well. And believe it or not, before joining Omega Squad, he was just working a desk at a Grand Army of the Republic logistics base. And so we gotta go back to that statement I made in the beginning of the video that, sometimes quality just completely gets overwhelmed by quantity. But what if that high quality clone trooper knows how to pilot a starfighter? Suddenly, we have a combat multiplier being applied to the single clone in the form of proton torpedoes and blaster cannons. A single clone, well trained to use a larger weapon system, could take out hundreds of battle droids. And I think this is really what makes the clones great. The clones were all essentially Swiss Army knives, but instead of having smaller miniaturized tools on the Swiss Army knives, all the tools are full size and very, very functional. No one in their right minds would naturally ever make a military force like this, and so it's quite interesting to see them in action. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.